It's lovely to be out on such a sunny evening in Edinburgh, but it's a shame that we have to be out tonight protesting against the two-child cap and the rate clause, well more than a year since Alison Thewlis, my colleague at Westminster, first spotted it in the small print of a Tory budget.
Very glad to see such a huge demonstration today and so many people still coming along 1 year after the rate clause came into force to show their opposition to this vile and despicable policy. The UK government have never been able to justify this policy, and we saw that this week with Esther McVeigh's pathetic attempts to say that the rate clause was somehow double support for women and that gives them some kind of chance to talk about the most appalling and disturbing experience of their life.
As you can see behind me, we're at the very beginning of the All Under One Banner rally. You can obviously hear the pipers behind me as events are about to kick off.
It's time to aim high, look resolutely outwards, and never, ever accept second best. Above all, it's time to believe that we can. We can build that better country we know is possible. And friends, we will.
If you enjoy watching our programmes, please help us to be Scotland's independent broadcaster by signing up to become a Broadcasting Scotland supporter.
Wherever you stand, get the fresh view of what's happening in Scotland with iScot. Celebrate everything about our country with intelligent, in-depth insight from lifestyle, culture to puzzles, and all the opinions you'll need. Whether it's digital or by post, subscribe now to iScot.
Good morning. We're going to begin this morning with consideration of a business motion 19378 in the name of Graham Days on behalf of the Bureau setting out a revision to today's business. And can I ask Maurice Golden to move the motion on behalf of the Bureau?
Moved.
Thank you very much. And no member seems to wish to speak on this motion. The question... Oh, Murdo Fraser does. Oh, it's just pressed, yes. Sorry, call Murdo Fraser.
I want to oppose the business motion. I do that in the knowledge that has been agreed by the Bureau, it has been agreed by my own party's business manager, but I oppose it on the grounds that this afternoon's Stage 1 debate on the non-domestic rates bill has been reduced to 1 hour and 25 minutes, and I understand the Speaker's time has also been reduced in that debate. This is a very important bill the Parliament will be considering. It has important consequences for the business community, who are looking with great interest at how we deal with the business rates regime. It has implications for independent schools. It has implications in other areas too. And it's extremely unfortunate that a vital piece of legislation is having its debating time constrained to less than an hour and a half. And the speakers in that debate are having their time constrained, I understand, to no more than 4 minutes. This is a parliament. The primary function of a parliament is to debate legislation. We spend a lot of time in this Parliament debating what are very worthy subjects in government business, but the priority must be given to legislation. And I'm extremely concerned at the situation that developed last night, which members raised in points of order at that time when Parliament sat for so long, dealing with legislation quite rightly. But the Business Bureau really needs to look at the amount of time that is being allocated to deal with the making of law, which is the priority for this Parliament, and it is simply not being well served by the way business is currently being timetabled.
Can I thank Murdo Fraser for the points he makes? Now, normally at this stage I would actually ask the Government's business manager to respond. Maurice Golden or any of the other business managers if they may respond if they choose to do so. I wasn't, unfortunately, normally I chair these meetings and this morning I wasn't. I can certainly say for the record that these matters that Mr Fraser raised are the very matters that we discuss every single time and weigh up. Does Mr Golden wish to add anything?
I think that this week we have had to, out of necessity and out of members' contributions, change decision time twice, which is unfortunate. It's something as a Bureau that we attempt to manage as best we can, and as the presiding officer made clear last night, that the Bureau is going to look at setting parameters so we do our best to avoid late decision times and indeed can prioritise legislation going forward.
Thank you very much. And I would note that the reason that we bring this motion to the Parliament, the Bureau sits representing everybody. It's up to Parliament to vote on, to each individual member to agree time. Does Mr Fraser wish to push the contested matter to a vote, or does he wish to... sorry, one second, please. I'm just going to put the question, and Mr Fraser can indicate otherwise. The question is that motion 19378 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. Thank you, Mr Fraser. No, the point is noted. And members may note from that this means there will be no members' business debate at lunchtime today. The afternoon's business will start at 1:30. So portfolio questions at 1:30 and decision time is scheduled for 5:15. And yes, it's also worth highlighting, it's all follow-on business. So although there are some scheduled times in there, they're all follow-on. So I would keep an eye and don't, if you're due to be in for moving amendments, and don't rely on questions taking the full amount of time allocated. So on that note, we'll move on to general questions. The first question this morning is from James Dornan.
To ask the Scottish Government what support is available for women who have been affected by miscarriage.
Minister Joe Fitzpatrick.
All health boards provide treatment and support to women following a miscarriage. Health boards will provide information and will often signpost women to third sector partners for further support. I particularly want to thank James Dornan for raising this question today during Baby Loss Awareness Week. We're supporting Baby Loss Awareness Week in a number of ways, including lighting up the Scottish Government building in pink and blue to show our support. And I visited the offices of SANS Lothian yesterday to hear more about this important subject and to talk to members of the charity and bereaved parents. I was very impressed with the commitment and level of support that Nicola Welsh and her team provide to parents who have sadly had a pregnancy or baby loss.
James Dornan.
I thank the Minister for that response. Many of those who have contacted me though on this matter are concerned about having to walk through existing maternity departments where young mothers are either going through successful pregnancies or have just given birth, which can often cause great upset for these parents still in mourning for their lost child. Can the Minister therefore provide an update on the progress of the natural bereavement care pathway and tell me if there is a provision in it to ensure that those suffering such loss don't have to walk through maternity wards and all the reminders of what they have just lost when they're going for support?
Minister.
I understand the stress that this could cause and would of course expect wherever possible that hospitals treat women with compassion and understanding and continue to look at and improve their services to meet the needs of all maternity service users. Development of the 5 different bereavement pathways mentioned by James Dornan is progressing well, with SANS UK leading in collaboration with other baby loss charities and health professionals to ensure that the pathways are suitable for Scotland. I expect the pathways to launch in the 5 early adopter sites in the first quarter of 2020.
Thank you. Question number 2, Ruth Maguire.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how it is marking Black History Month.
Minister Christina McKelvey.
The First Minister and I both attended the launch of Black History Month in Parliament on the 24th of September, hosted by the Coalition for Racial Equality and Rights. I will be participating in Black History Month tour of Glasgow tomorrow, exploring the city's historical ties with slavery. Scottish Government race equality officials will be attending Black History Month events over the course of October, and the Scottish Government Race Equality Staff Network also has a series of internal events planned to mark the month. Also, just last week, I met with the African Council in Aberdeen to discuss many issues facing our citizens, including how we use Black History Month to tackle racism.
Ruth Maguire.
I thank the Minister for that answer. Black history in Scotland is rich and long, with some sources stating that the first man arrested for wearing a kilt after Culloden was a black man. Does the Minister agree with me that Black history is Scottish history and we shouldn't just celebrate 1 month a year? We should do all we can to integrate it and learn about it all year round.
Minister.
Yes, I'd be delighted to absolutely agree with my colleague Ruth Maguire on this. We are a culturally enriched nation. I think some of the colours of our tartans are expressed in the fact that we do have that very enriching, colourful cultural background. Maybe to give Ruth Maguire a wee bit of an update, race equality officials and myself have ongoing meetings with many of the organisations. We've allocated over £2.3 million in 2019-20 to fund those organisations to advance race equality all year round, just not in Black History Month alone. In February 2019, Respect Me published an anti-racist bullying resource which addresses inclusion, effectively challenging racism in schools. To support this, we continue to fund Respect Me to do this work. And the Race Equality Action Plan, the Scottish Government is committed to increasing the number of teachers from underrepresented groups at all levels of Scottish schools. Hopefully that will encourage and reassure Ruth Maguire that all year round we take our cultural enrichment from Black History Month to every single month of the year.
Thank you. Question number 3, Bob Doris.
To ask the Scottish Government what contribution NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde will make to the proposed new national thrombectomy service.
Cabinet Secretary Jean Freeman.
Before the introduction of the thrombectomy service, it is imperative that proper clinical planning for such a highly specialised intervention is undertaken. The programme for government commits us to ensuring that a national planning framework is in place in order to provide a high-quality and clinically safe thrombectomy service. NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde sit on the Directors of Planning Thrombectomy Advisory Group. This group is currently developing a national framework for the introduction of the service. Once the framework is finalised, appropriate thrombectomy service sites will be approved, and it is currently anticipated that the service may be available in at least one board area by 2020.
Bob Doris.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. Presiding Officer, I recently met with a constituent of mine whose husband is making a strong recovery from stroke thanks to a thrombectomy procedure which is not available in Scotland as yet, as we know. He underwent this procedure whilst on holiday in Mallorca. I understand the National Planning Board may sign off on a national service imminently, Cabinet Secretary, but can I seek a reassurance that the Scottish Government will ensure NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde offer this service as soon as possible, as concerns have been raised with me it could be another year before it's actually implemented?
Cabinet Secretary.
I'm grateful to Mr Doris for his additional question. Certainly the Greater Glasgow and Clyde area covered by that health board is a significant area in terms of the incidence of stroke. The west of Scotland is one of the areas where we see the highest incidence. Our intention, though, is to provide a thrombectomy service that covers the whole of Scotland, including in particular the north. So we will work to ensure that when the service is introduced, as it is being introduced in England, it will be done on a phased basis. At this point, it isn't possible to say which part of the country will be in the initial phase, but certainly once we have that clearer information, we'll make sure that Mr Doris is advised.
Thank you. Monica Lennon.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Is the Cabinet Secretary able to give a commitment as to when thrombectomy will be available to patients in every health board, including Lanarkshire, and if funding for each health board has been identified yet?
Cabinet Secretary.
So just on the question of funding, until we have the clear planning framework, and it is of course part of the overall stroke pathway and the work that is additional work that is now committed to from the programme for government, including the appointment of a clinical medical specialist in stroke to look at the whole pathway across Scotland. But until that framework is finalised, it's not possible to give a commitment in terms of either the final dates when it will cover the whole of Scotland, or to know what the additional resource would be. But we've made the commitment to deliver this service, so the resource will be made available to deliver the service once the planning framework is in place, and at that point we will know the timescale for the phasing in of thrombectomy across Scotland. And as I said to my colleague Mr Doris, I will make sure that Ms Lennon too is aware of how that will be phased in across Scotland.
Thank you. Question number 4, Alexander Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what its response is to the call from Ash Scotland to join up an approach to services related to tobacco and other health-harming substances.
Minister Joe Fitzpatrick.
We welcome the fact that Ash Scotland continues to raise awareness that smoking remains the single biggest avoidable cause of death in Scotland, killing more than 9,000 people each year. Through the partnership approach we take to tackling the use of and harm from tobacco in Scotland, this figure continues to decline each year. In June 2018, we published our public health priorities. These include a joined-up priority to reduce the use of and harm from alcohol, tobacco and other drugs. It's the responsibility of health boards and integrated authorities to decide how best to join up their services to deliver on this priority. The Scottish Government continues to encourage boards and authorities to take a joined-up approach to services aimed at tackling the effects of health-harming substances.
Alexander Stewart.
I thank the Minister for that response, and I'd like to note my interest in this subject as the British Lung Foundation's smoking cessation champion. Smoking prevalent rates across Scotland have flatlined, according to data in the Scottish Health Survey of 2018, and there has been a concerning increase in the number of smokers in Scotland's most deprived communities. Can the Minister tell me what new steps are in the Respiratory Care Action Plan to increase the number of people quitting smoking?
Minister.
So obviously the member is aware that the action plan will be coming forward in due course and is continuing to be worked on, but I will talk about some of the actions that we are taking. So this week we launched a consultation which paves the way for removing smoking outside hospital buildings, and later this year we will consult on restricting advertising and promotion of electronic cigarettes. These are the kind of actions which will be taken, will keen that overall smoking trends continue to decline. I am aware of the statistics that the member mentions, and it is something we need to be mindful of. The trend continues to be down, and it's particularly good to see the levels of smoking amongst the youngest remains at historically low levels. We need to see whether the slight blips, I think the increase, it looks like there's an increase in adult smoking from 18 to 19. I think that largely that accounts from rounding, from 18.4, which was rounded down, and 18.7, which was rounded up. But we absolutely need to keep looking at that, particularly around those deprived communities where we are seeing an increase in uptake of services for cessation. So that's a good thing that we need to keep working on, and I absolutely appreciate the continued support of the member on this matter.
And David Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Does the Minister share Ash Scotland's assessment of the link between smoking and health inequality, and that we need a national strategy that tackles smoking cessation and poverty alleviation?
Minister.
I think the member makes an important point that he's made many times before, and you won't find this government arguing against the links between health inequality and poverty and deprivation. It's absolutely something we need to continue to work on, and the member will continue to get my support for his interventions in this matter.
Thank you. Question number 5, Donald Cameron.
To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on any planned upgrades to the Gourock-Dunoon passenger ferry service.
Minister Paul Wheelhouse.
We have started a project that will consider the long-term requirements of the Gourock-Dunoon passenger ferry service, including vessel and infrastructure upgrades. We'll also consider opportunities for shorter-term improvements in passenger facilities. Presiding Officer, the recent link span issues at Gourock and any inconvenience caused to passengers are regrettable. However, the challenging situation has been managed effectively by both CMAL and CalMac with minimal disruption to passengers using the Gourock-Dunoon service.
Cameron.
The Minister may be aware that recent media reports have revealed that the 2 vessels that currently operate the route have racked up over 2,000 cancellations since they came into service. Given the obvious unreliability of these ferries, does he agree that the people of Dunoon and the Cowal Peninsula deserve an urgent and effective solution to a situation that has gone on far too long, as opposed to yet again kicking this into the long grass?
Minister.
I think Donald Cameron would accept that in the engagements I've had with him, I have recognised there have been challenges in the Gourock-Dunoon service, and indeed we are trying to move, as he knows, to a position where we have a longer-term stability and reliability for the service. I would like to say to Mr Cameron and others who have an interest in the route and have frequent discussions with Mike Russell, for example, as one of the constituency members affected, that we are seeing an increase in passenger traffic on the service, which I hope Mr Cameron would welcome. Notwithstanding disruption there is to the vessels, we recognise those vessels are not ideal for the route. And we are working through the project I've just outlined in my first answer with CalMac, with SPT, Clyde Marine, to make sure the necessary arrangements are put in place to support the revised service timetables and all, that have been in recent times. And also we are looking to try and make sure that the project takes on board the views of those passengers using Gourock-Dunoon, trade unions and indeed local authorities in terms of the harbour facilities. So I'm happy to engage with Mr Cameron, as with other members who've got an interest in this, as we take the work forward. But we do recognise the challenges, but we are working on providing a long-term solution for the service.
Thank you. Question number 6, David Torrance.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how many local authority and affordable houses have been delivered in the Kirkcaldy constituency since 2012.
Minister Kevin Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Scottish Government has delivered 893 local authority and affordable houses in the Kirkcaldy constituency through our Affordable Housing Supply Programme and Open Market Shared Equity Programme since 2012. Our support aims to deliver a range of housing and a mix of affordable tenures, but primarily focusing on social rented housing. This is a key government priority as we aim to deliver 35,000 social rent homes across Scotland as part of our 50,000 affordable homes programme, backed by a record investment of £3.3 billion.
David Torrance.
Does the Minister agree with me that Brexit will have a devastating impact on the availability of skilled workers in the construction industry and could potentially damage the good results being achieved by the Scottish Government in delivering new housing programmes?
Minister.
Presiding Officer, I do agree with Mr Torrance. I'm deeply concerned that all of our good work increasing Scotland's housing supply could be significantly undermined by a no-deal Brexit. 7,000 EU nationals were employed in the Scottish construction sector in 2017, and a no-deal Brexit poses a significant risk to the Scottish construction workforce and to builders' supply chains. The UK Government's immigration plans will be disastrous for keeping and attracting the necessary skills and will have a huge impact on the availability of the EU national workforce in the construction and house building industry. Private house builders are particularly vulnerable to the implications of Brexit, as some 60% of construction materials were imports from the EU in 2018. Be in no doubt that a Tory no-deal Brexit would be a disaster for many areas of life in Scotland, and this is just one of them.
Question 7, briefly, Liam MacArthur.
To ask the Scottish Government when it expects to set out a clear timetable for the delivery of the R100 programme.
Minister Paul Gourock.
Thank you. Our £600 million R100 programme is a vital investment in our digital infrastructure. It will help to deliver a future-proof network, making Scotland one of the best connected places anywhere in Europe. Procurement for R100 has been split into 3 lots that cover north, central and south areas. Final tenders were submitted on the 23rd of August and detailed evaluation is currently in progress. I can confirm that BT plc were the only bidder for the central and south lots, and that subject to due diligence and governance we intend to proceed to contract with BT as soon as possible. More than one bid was received for the north lot, and we will announce a preferred bidder for the north lot in due course.
Liam MacArthur.
Can I thank the Minister for the reply? But last September, Audit Scotland told the Scottish Government it needed to publish clear timetables by summer 2019. A year on in the Programme for Government statement, the First Minister conspicuously dropped the earlier 2021 deadline for delivery of R100. So what can my constituents in Orkney, which still has the lowest coverage rates in Scotland, expect to get access to the long-awaited and much-needed high-speed broadband?
Minister.
Presiding Officer, we set out in response just before recess a timetable which we are trying to stick to achieve the securing of contracts being signed by the end of this calendar year, and we are still on course to achieve that. That will provide the certainty for all areas affected by R100 as to the degree of coverage that we provided under R100 and those properties that may need to be picked up through aligned interventions. I would stress, though, to Mr MacArthur that I appreciate that there are still customers waiting in Orkney to have a service. This is, of course, a matter that is, as he knows from correspondence, a reserved matter, but we are making great progress in delivery for Orkney. For example, only 12% of premises in Orkney in January 2014 had access to fibre broadband. By the February of this year, that figure was up to 81.9%. And indeed, we've seen a 69.9% increase over that period and a 54% increase in super-fast access over the same period. So I hope Mr MacArthur would welcome the progress that's been made. We need to work together to deliver for those remaining properties. I recognise that, but I hope he will soon see progress from R100 that will benefit his constituents.
Thank you. That concludes general questions. We'll move on now to First Minister's questions. Question number 1, Jackson Carlow.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Does the First Minister agree that MESH has become in Scotland and beyond the greatest medical scandal of modern times?
First Minister.
In general terms, yes, I would share the concern that Jackson Carlow has articulated today and indeed has articulated on previous occasions. For the Scottish Government, there are two ongoing priorities here, and I hope they have the support of people across the Chamber. First was, of course, to ensure a halt to new MESH procedures, and earlier this week we saw the statistics showing that there have been no such procedures in Scotland since the Health Secretary took the action to draw a halt to them. The second priority, which is certainly ongoing, is to make sure that women who have suffered complications from MESH procedures in the past get the care and treatment that they need and are entitled to. And this is something the Scottish Government takes extremely seriously and will continue to take the appropriate steps. Lastly and finally, the wider issues around MESH, and this is something we've discussed in the Chamber previously in terms of the approval of the particular procedure and what are used in those procedures is a matter governed by the MHRA. That's not within the responsibilities of the Scottish Government, but we have, with the support of members across the Chamber, including, I think, Jackson Carlow, urged action at UK Government level.
Jackson Carlow.
Thank you. Presiding Officer, the First Minister is right. This issue has seen a heroic and successful effort by Scottish MESH survivors to secure a moratorium on this practice, and we were delighted at the action of the Cabinet Secretary and the fact that the statistics this week showed that there had been no further procedures. We had hoped that for those women in desperate need of MESH removal surgery, Scotland would welcome the pioneering American surgeon, Dr. Dionysius Veronicus, to undertake MESH removal, which will change hundreds of lives. Yet we now learn that Dr. Veronicus has called off, mostly it seems due to a coordinated attempt to block him by powerful people within the NHS and the medical hierarchy. Presiding Officer, my constituent Lorna Farrell raised thousands of pounds herself to travel to the United States to be operated on privately and have her MESH successfully removed by Dr. Veronicus there. Surely the First Minister will agree that it's unacceptable of women, having been harmed, however inadvertently, by our own Scottish NHS, have to raise thousands of pounds to then undergo a horrendous journey while enduring severe pain and difficulty to have that wrong righted privately in the United States.
First Minister.
Well, again, can I say to Jackson Carlow that I have enormous sympathy with the sentiments that he expresses today on behalf of his constituent, but those sentiments, of course, could be expressed on behalf of any woman who has suffered complications and is suffering from a MESH procedure. Let me address very directly the issue of the specialist from the United States, Dr. Veronicus. The Scottish Government wants him to come here, and that remains the case. For him to be able to treat patients here, however, certain General Medical Council requirements have to be met. The Scottish Government has no discretion to waive those. One of those is the need for a contract of employment from the National Health Service. That necessitates clinicians from here going to see him in the United States. We had hoped that would happen in August. Due to clinical commitments here, by clinicians here, that had to be postponed. Clinicians from here will visit the United States in November next month and remain willing to meet with Dr. Veronicus if he agrees to reconsider his position. I very respectfully concede that that is entirely a matter for him. Jackson Carlaw talked about efforts on behalf of senior influential people. I am not aware of any such efforts, and let me be very clear about that. And it would not be acceptable for anybody within the medical community here to be seeking to block that, and it is not my understanding that that is the case. Indeed, it was the Chief Medical Officer here who personally invited Dr Veronikis to come to Scotland, and as I said at the outset of this answer, it remains our wish that that can happen.
Jackson Carlaw.
The clear suspicion of many is that there is a professional and institutional campaign to frustrate Dr Veronikis' involvement. It's the view of many that establishment figures in the NHS are trying to protect their own backs, and I exclude any blame or suggestion of it from the Cabinet Secretary personally here. Last night I contacted Dr Wael Ogur, the leading mesh expert here in Scotland and one of my constituents. This is what he had to say about Dr Veronikis' visit. I can confirm that surgeons here felt deeply threatened by Dr Veronikis' offer to visit Scotland. No doubt there is a professional conspiracy against his visit. The surgeons suggested another US surgeon instead, Harold Goldman, who is one of the most prominent proponents of continuing the use of mesh. In addition, he promotes partial rather than total mesh removal, the complete opposite of Dr Veronikis. Inviting Dr Goldman would undoubtedly support local surgeons here in their efforts to reintroduce mesh procedures into Scotland. First Minister, if this is true, it's an outrage. Will the First Minister now personally intervene?
First Minister.
I have already, as I think Jackson Carlaw and others would expect me to have done, have looked very closely at this. If there is the suspicion that Jackson Carlaw has narrated here today, I'm not going to stand here and second guess that. If that is what people feel, that is a suspicion that requires to be addressed. What I am saying genuinely to Jackson Carlaw is that I am not aware of evidence that backs that up. And if there is evidence, I would certainly want to see that and be in a position to take action around that. I have set out, and I've tried to do it very clearly and very calmly, the requirements that are not set by the Scottish Government, they're set by the General Medical Council, that require to be met before somebody from outside the UK can come and treat and practice here in the UK. Those requirements to be met required clinicians from here to go to the States. It is regrettable that that visit planned for August had to be postponed, but that visit will now take place, and if Dr Veronikis is prepared to reconsider his position, then that will be an opportunity for that requirement to be fulfilled. I think everybody wants patients to have the treatment that they need, and let me say this point very clearly as well, the treatment that is considered to be clinically right for them, but also treatment that they themselves have confidence in and can be assured about the efficacy of. And I am prepared as First Minister to consider all options to make sure that women get that treatment. And we will continue to do that, because I do not underestimate at all in any way, shape or form the suffering, the stress, the pain and the anxiety that many women have suffered as a result of this.
Jackson Carlaw.
I thank the First Minister for that. I can say the women have complete confidence in Dr Ogur, who is actually acting within the Scottish Government's own review group. And they have complete confidence in Dr Veronikis, particularly my constituent, who is a living example of the success of his mesh removal procedures. Her life is transformed, and it's hugely emotional to meet her and see that. My principal concern remains firmly for the women affected. Arguably, the moment for a public inquiry may, depending on events, be coming. However, during this decade-long scandal, many of the affected women feel they have been unable to meet and discuss their experience directly with the First Minister. They feel that the urgency of their situation now needs the direct support and engagement of the head of their government. So, together with MSPs from across the chamber, will the First Minister agree today to meet the affected women directly in early course, listen to them and give them the personal commitment, leadership and attention of the First Minister to get their lives sorted?
First Minister.
Yes, I will. But I want to, in doing that, I want to also today make it very clear to the women affected that this does have my personal attention. It has the close personal attention of the Health Secretary. I think that can be demonstrated in the actions that have been taken, and we will continue to demonstrate it in the actions that will be taken. I obviously understand the deep emotion that many feel about this, obviously the women affected, but those who have direct contact with the women affected. And I understand the scepticism and the concerns about the way in which elements within the medical community in Scotland are perceived to be addressing this. And we must tackle that, and we must systematically take action to make sure that that is not the case. I want any patient who considers it best, and where there is a clinical view that it is best for them to be treated by somebody like Dr. Veronicas, for that to happen. I obviously cannot stipulate that he agrees to come here, but if he is willing to reconsider his position, then the steps are in process to fulfil the requirements to allow that to happen. Beyond that, we will openly consider any other options to make sure that women get access to the care and treatment that they need. And that is a commitment that the Health Secretary has previously given, I have previously given, but I have no hesitation in giving it again today.
Thank you. Question number 2, Richard Leonard.
Presiding Officer, can I remind the First Minister that these mesh-injured women have suffered years of pain and injustice, so that when she meets them, will she apologise to them? One woman who contacted us spoke of having 6 surgeries, including a hysterectomy. I quote her, "The surgery was necessary to rid me of the daily pain. I now live with a prolapsed bladder, bowel and vaginal vault," she said. "I need to take a cocktail of medication daily, 18 tablets. She contacted us this week because she was so deeply upset to learn that Dr. Veronicas is not coming to Scotland. She is concerned that without his treatment, she may lose her job. First Minister, what do you have to say to her?
First Minister.
Well, again, and I've said this in the Chamber previously, as First Minister, I apologise to any patient who suffers on the National Health Service. I think that is something that people have a right to expect. There is a long history in terms of mesh procedure. We have rehearsed some of that often in this chamber before. Some of it in terms of the approvals for the procedure and the equipment used is out with the responsibility of the government, and we have come together as a parliament to demand action where that action can be taken. But in terms of the treatment that is provided in the health service, the actions that we have taken, firstly on the moratorium to halt mesh procedures, in itself, I think, is an indication of how seriously we treat this issue. And then secondly, on the issue of women who are suffering from complications, I have already, in the interest of time, I won't run through all of the requirements around the doctor from the United States coming here, but let me stress again that it is my desire to enable him to come here, to allow patients to have access to his specialism here without having to travel. But beyond that, we remain open to any options that are right for women, both clinically and in order to give women the peace of mind that they want. One of the things that distresses me when I read all of the material and read the personal testimonies here is that I am advised as First Minister that full mesh removal has been carried out on many patients in Scotland. But if Neil Findlay can allow me, I'm about to address the very point that I think he's making to me. I also understand that many women believe that while they were told they were to receive full removal, in fact that wasn't undertaken. There are real issues that we do have to get to the heart of here, and I'm determined to do it. The Health Secretary is determined to do it. Many members in this chamber have been incredibly constructive in the approach to this, and I hope that together, taking the full responsibility of government as it is incumbent on me to do, then we can make sure that some of the historic issues are fully looked into, but in the here and now, women who are suffering get access to the treatment that they need.
Richard Leonard.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And there was indeed cross-party support for the moratorium, and this week's figures are welcome. The First Minister spoke earlier of looking for evidence of obstruction. In a letter to Labour's Neil Findlay, Dr Veronicas has written to explain just why he has rescinded his offer. And he cites delays and disrespectful behaviours. But he also said this, and this is serious and reflects something which the First Minister has just alluded to. He said in his letter to us, and I quote him, "The Scottish Mesh injured women are vindicated in what they presented to Minister Freeman in March 2019. What has been recorded in their medical records as a full removal was not. It was a partial removal." First Minister, why have these women been misled, and what are you going to do about it?
First Minister.
Well, I very openly alluded to that point. That is a point that concerns me deeply and a point that we are determined to help women get to the bottom of. I understand, and I'll be corrected if I'm wrong about this, that the cross-party group last night on chronic pain, there was an issue raised there about access to scans for women who feel that they haven't had the full mesh removal that they were told they had. Again, that's one of the things that we want to fully consider. We are determined to make sure that as far as we can, we get to the bottom of where women have been given treatment that has damaged them, or where treatment that was meant to rectify that has not been what they were told, and where they get access to the treatment they need now. I've set out very clearly and very openly some of the issues. I regret the delays around trying to meet the requirements to have Dr Veronicas come here, but those are requirements that the Scottish Government weren't able simply to waive, the requirements of the General Medical Council. But it is the case that there will be clinicians from Scotland visiting the United States next month. If the doctor is willing to reconsider his position, it's entirely a matter for him, but I would very much welcome it if he did. Then those requirements can be met, and I would still hope that Dr Veronicas can come to Scotland. In terms of a letter, Dr Veronicas has also written to the Health Secretary. If there's information in the letter Richard Leonard has alluded to that we don't have, I would be very happy to look at that if he wants to pass it to us, if he hasn't already done so. I can't stress enough the determination on my part, on Jean Freeman's part, on the part of the entire Scottish Government, not just to get to the bottom of why women are in this position, but to make sure we are giving women access to the treatment that will bring an end to the pain and suffering that they are so unjustly experiencing.
Richard Leonard.
This is just so important. Dr Veronicas offered these women the first glimpse of hope that they might get their lives back. And the fact is, First Minister, the Cabinet Secretary for Health looked Scotland's mesh-injured women in the eye, and she gave them a commitment to a course of action that could give some of these women their lives back. The world-leading pioneering surgeon, who the Health Secretary invited to come here, now feels that the officials and senior surgeons in Scotland, working for our NHS, accountable to your government, obstructed this course of action. And at the centre of all this are women left languishing in pain. So your government has lost the confidence of these mesh-injured women. Your Health Secretary appears to have lost control of this situation. So will you now step in and take the decisive action that is needed?
First Minister.
I am already closely involved in making sure that, as the Health Secretary is, we are taking the action that we require to take. I would say it's because of the action of Jean Freeman that the moratorium, the halt, was put in place, and that there are no more of these procedures taking place. It is not because of Jean Freeman that Dr Veronicas is not coming at this moment in time to Scotland. I have set out the requirements that have to be met and that they're not Scottish Government requirements, and how we are trying to meet them. I'm more than happy to speak to the doctor personally. I am not aware, and I say this openly, because if anybody has evidence of the kind of obstruction that is being talked about here now, then I want to know about that. But based on the information I have, the attempts to get the doctor here have been made and will continue to be made if he remains willing. So I can't be any clearer than that than I have already been. There is an absolute determination to make sure that we take the necessary action here, and I hope we continue to have the constructive support of members across the chamber, including Jackson Carlow and Richard Leonard, that we've had in the past, because this is not a matter of party politics. This is a matter of doing the right thing, and we are all determined to do that.
Thank you very much. We're going to move on to some constituency supplementaries. The first from Edward Mountain, to be followed by John Mason. Edward Mountain.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, the new Highland prison has been delayed for years, and the current prison is no longer fit for purpose. It's overcrowded. 200 prisoners from the Highlands and Islands have been dispersed elsewhere. Seizures of drugs, weapons and mobile phones have increased. And we learned today from the Press and Journal's work that key areas of the prison are without CCTV, endangering prison staff. First Minister, is it not time that the safety and welfare of our Highland prison staff was made a top priority? And will you or your Cabinet Secretary meet jointly with me and prison staff to try and resolve the safety issues at HMP Inverness?
First Minister.
Well, the Justice Secretary, of course, would be happy to meet with members to discuss issues in our prisons. We are committed to ongoing investment in our prison estate. We are committed to modernising and improving that prison estate. Of course, security, not just in terms of prisoners, but security for staff who work in our prisons is extremely important. CCTV is important. The SPS have other security measures beyond CCTV for staff and people in their care within HMP Inverness in particular. So we will continue to do that, and we're happy to discuss these plans in more detail. But we will also continue to take action to reform our justice system, to tackle the fact that while we have crime that is amongst the lowest levels we've seen for 40 years or more, we have proportionately the highest prison population in the Western world. That's why we are taking action to have the presumption against short-term sentences, to have more alternatives to custody, which are better for rehabilitation and reducing reoffending as well. And I would say to the member, to the best of my memory, the Conservatives have opposed every single one of those reform proposals. So this is a serious issue, and perhaps if the Conservatives were to engage with it a bit more seriously, constructively in the round, we might make more progress than the progress that we're making to date.
John Mason, to be followed by James Kelly. John Mason.
Thank you. I think the First Minister will be aware that Glasgow City Council has expressed concern about the level of gambling adverts, especially that young people are exposed to. And I wonder if she has or she can have discussions with the Council about that.
Minister.
Well, this obviously is an important issue. I am aware of recent discussions within Glasgow City Council about problem gambling within the city and the impact that advertising is having on that. I understand that the Council is planning to hold a summit to develop plans to ensure that people are aware of the risks and harms associated with gambling. While advertising is the responsibility of the UK-wide Advertising Standards Authority, we're committed to exploring what more we can do to help deal with the problem of gambling. Of course, it would be more effective if all powers associated with gambling were devolved to this Parliament so that Scottish solutions could be taken forward more quickly.
James Kelly, to be followed by Adam Tompkins.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This week, the Chief Executive of the Scottish Prison Service, Colin McConnell, told the Justice Committee that a replacement for Berlin Prison in Glasgow would not be operational until 2025, 6 years later than planned. Audit Scotland has deemed that the building is high risk, and indeed it's 50% over capacity, with many prisoners having to share cells. And of those shared cells, 92% were designed for single occupancy. The Chief Executive also stated that current contingency plans, if there was an emergency, simply involved moving prisoners to another location with mattresses and a floor. This is an unacceptable and unsustainable situation. So, can I ask the First Minister what steps the Government will take to address the chronic position at Berlin Prison, and what plans they will put in place to address the crisis in the Scottish Prison Service around overcrowding, underfinancing and staffing?
First Minister.
Well, these are serious issues which the Government, indeed at Cabinet level, pay very close and very regular attention to. A replacement for Barlinnie Prison is, of course, one of our key infrastructure priorities. The SPS is progressing with plans for the development of the new prison in Glasgow, and negotiations for purchase of a site that has been identified are underway. However, we also acknowledge that as a result of the recent rise in the prison population, interim measures are needed to improve current conditions at Barlinnie, and action will be taken in that regard. We're also closely working with the prison service to ensure that robust measures are in place to ensure the safety of both staff and prisoners who are in the care of Barlinnie. I think it is worth pointing out, in addition to the point I made to a previous question about investment in our prisons being very important, but we also have a challenge as a country, I think, to rebalance our justice policy so that we don't have so many people going into our prisons when actually more effective sentences would be available elsewhere. But it's also worth pointing out that since 2007, the Scottish Government has invested almost £600 million in the prison estate, including for 3 new prisons, Lowmoss, Addywell and Grampian, and refurbishment of existing prisons at Pullman, Edinburgh, Glenorchy, Shotts and Perth. And we will continue to make sure that those investments are made so that we are easing the pressure on the prison estate overall, but certainly and in particular including Barlinnie.
Adam Tompkins.
First Minister, the SNP's Lord Provost has ripped off the people of Glasgow. Isn't it time she went?
First Minister.
Well, Eva Bollinger, who I think is an excellent Lord Provost for the City of Glasgow, has, I think rightly and very frankly, reflected on some of the expense claims she made, all of which I will say were within the rules, but nevertheless reflected on those and decided herself that she should not have made certain claims. I think that is the right decision. Beyond that, I think all of us as elected politicians have to be careful and considered about our expense claims. But I don't think any of us want to have a situation where it's only people who can take on those roles, particularly those like Lord Provost, that require attendance at a lot of formal function, that it's only people who can afford to equip themselves for that that can take on those roles. So I think the Lord Provost has herself reflected, and I think she was absolutely right to do so.
Question number 3, Patrick Harvey.
I hope the whole chamber will join me in expressing solidarity with the Kurdish people, betrayed and abandoned. Betrayed and abandoned by the US and now enduring an assault by Turkey, a NATO member. I hope the First Minister will join me in condemning those actions. Presiding Officer, ministers have been aware for over a year that the US military is getting a 7-figure discount to refuel at Prestwick, an airport owned by the Scottish Government on behalf of the public. This is a growing scandal. There's already a US Congress inquiry into this relationship. If the First Minister is against Scotland being used as a nuclear submarine base for the UK, why should we be any happier to be used as a cut-price petrol station for the US Air Force?
First Minister.
Well, the Transport Secretary, of course, outlined the position in terms of Prestwick earlier this week in the Chamber in response to a topical question. Prestwick Airport is state-owned, but it runs commercially completely independently of the Scottish Government. And that's not something that is just done for convenience. It is essential that there is that arm's-length relationship in order that we are compliant with state aid rules. If we were to interfere in the running of Prestwick Airport, we would put in jeopardy the future operation of the airport. And for those who want to see the airport continue, for those who want to see it have a future, and for those who want to see the jobs that are dependent on it continue, then I think that is the right and responsible thing to do. In terms of Patrick Harvey's question about Syria, can I say very clearly and very strongly that I and the Scottish Government am deeply concerned and strongly opposed to Turkey's unilateral military action in northern Syria, and also extremely concerned by Donald Trump's decision to withdraw support and leave Kurdish allies to the mercy of whatever Turkey chooses to do. I think that is particularly reprehensible given the sacrifices that Kurds have made in helping to defeat ISIS. So I hope there is a very strong response from the international community, both against the action that Turkey has taken, and we have seen on previous occasions the consequences and the implications for Kurds of Turkish action of this nature. So I hope there is a strong opposition to Turkey's action, but I also hope there is a strong international support for Kurds as well.
Patrick Harvey.
The First Minister is keen to tell us about the arm's-length relationship with Prestwick, but the Prestwick governance structure clearly shows that two of the First Minister's officials sit on the board of the holding company, and that's supposed to provide a line of democratic accountability for the issue so that we're not reliant on investigative journalists uncovering the facts of what's going on, but the Scottish Government should be giving us updates. So can the First Minister update us now? Is there, in fact, any other business plan for Prestwick other than providing a bargain service for Trump's military and booking them taxis to Turnberry? Will the Scottish Government and the First Minister stop ignoring the nature of this scandal, accept responsibility to ensure that our public assets are not being used to support the military operations of a dangerous far-right regime, and end the relationship between Prestwick and the US military?
First Minister.
Well, I've set out the situation in terms of state aid requirements. If we want to ensure that Prestwick Airport has a future, we have to comply with those requirements. In terms of the sources of revenue for Prestwick Airport, those are laid out in the accounts that Prestwick Airport publish. The last set of accounts cover the period to the end of March 2018, and they publish those accounts on an annual basis. Beyond that, in terms of the future for Prestwick, as we have always said, we want to return Prestwick Airport to the private sector as soon as we are able to do so. The senior management team at the airport has continued to engage with potential buyers and investors, and we will continue to take the action that we require to take to ensure that that airport has a future, because I think that's what's important for the economy in that part of Ayrshire, and I think that's what's important for the many jobs that depend on Prestwick Airport having a future.
Question number 4, Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. A year ago, the Scottish Government published its waiting times plan. It said that nothing that had happened before should count against its record now, and this Parliament swallowed that. Since then, accident and emergency targets have been missed every week. All summer, they were worse than last year. There are more young people waiting over a year for mental health treatment. We've seen the worst ever performance against the treatment time guarantee, and we learned this week of a patient waiting 4 years for dental surgery. This is causing people pain, it's causing people anxiety and suffering. Will the First Minister take this opportunity to apologise to them?
First Minister.
Well, our NHS is seeing and treating more patients than ever before. If you take accident and emergency, for example, this year over 1.5 million patients have been treated within the 4-hour target, which is the highest in any year since 2012. We're seeing more cancer patients treated within the targets, and of course our investment in the Waiting Times Improvement Plan is helping to ensure that the investments are in the right places to see waiting times continue to come down. Demand is rising in our NHS, which is why we are building the capacity to meet that additional demand. And while, of course, there remain challenges, big challenges for our National Health Service, not least at the front line in our accident and emergency units, Scotland's core A&E services performance was 10.5 percentage points higher than A&E units in England and 17.6 percentage points higher than in Wales. So there are big challenges for everybody's NHS, but I think the evidence suggests that this government is making the investments and taking the actions that are right for patients across the country.
Alex Cole-Hamilton.
I'm sure that the comparison with other nations is cold comfort to people waiting, and these people are still waiting. In fact, the one single cancer target the government was actually meeting before the recovery plan, it isn't meeting anymore. The reason these people aren't being seen is that there is nobody there to see them. In mental health, psychiatry vacancies hit crisis levels this week. And the workforce plan has been delayed yet again by this government. It's nearly a year late. When will we see it? When will A&E targets start to be met? When will mental health targets start to be met? On World Mental Health Day, is the First Minister really going to tell these patients to sit back, shut up and wait another year?
First Minister.
No, I would never tell anybody to do that. I should of course welcomed Alex Cole-Hamilton to his place for First Minister's questions covering for Willie Rennie, who's on holiday. But can I say, in terms, Alex Cole-Hamilton has mentioned a number of services in the health service. He mentioned psychiatrist vacancies. Can I point out to him that the number of CAMS psychiatrists, since we put additional funding into place, has increased by 15%. Our accident and emergency departments are performing better than any others in the UK, and we're investing to make sure that across our National Health Service we're building the capacity to meet the increased demand. Cancer has been mentioned as well. We are seeing more cancer patients within the target times than previously. So we will continue to make these investments so that we have a health service that is delivering the excellent treatment for patients that the vast majority of patients across the country already consider that our National Health Service is delivering.
There's not much time today, but I'll try to squeeze in a couple of supplementary questions. Claire Adamson, to be followed by Liam Kerr.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This weekend I received a handwritten note to my home from a constituent, an elderly constituent, deeply worried about the impact of Brexit on her health. I have kept her informed of the ministerial statement from Tuesday and hope she takes some comfort from the work that the Scottish Government is doing to mitigate any circumstances. However, is the First Minister aware of the comments of Dame Sally Davies, the outgoing Chief Medical Officer of England, who this morning said of medicine supply in the event of a no-deal Brexit, and I quote, "There may be deaths, we can't guarantee there won't."
First Minister.
Well, I have seen the comments that Dame Sally Davies has made this morning. They are absolutely horrifying. I mean, she has said that lives are at risk and it can't be guaranteed that people won't die because of potential medicine shortages and the impact of a no-deal Brexit. And if nothing else that has been said over recent weeks and months about the consequences of a no-deal Brexit has made any difference to the UK Government, then I really hope that these comments today will make that difference. Michael Gove, I know, is in Scotland for meetings later on today, and the question to him really has to be, do people have to die before this UK Government comes to its senses and rules out a no-deal Brexit completely? It is absolutely unconscionable that it is still being contemplated, and that at times it appears to be the desired policy of the Prime Minister and others. And it is absolutely beyond belief, particularly in light of comments like this, that Jackson Carlow and the Scottish Conservatives seem quite happy to back Boris Johnson in taking the UK out of the EU with no deal. I don't think people in Scotland will readily forgive them for that.
Liam Kerr.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. On the 11th of September, the Justice Secretary tweeted that he would meet with Alicia McPhail's family to discuss their concerns about the justice system. As of yesterday, the family were very upset that they had had no contact, not even a phone call. Will the First Minister tell her Justice Secretary to get in touch with the family without further delay?
First Minister.
No, I'll continue to support my Justice Secretary in taking the appropriate and sensitive and right action that he has taken. Just to be clear, Presiding Officer, the Justice Secretary made a commitment that he would meet with Alicia McPhail's mum before he met with any other members of the family. Unfortunately, for entirely understandable reasons, that meeting had to be postponed by Alicia's mum. So the Justice Secretary will honour that commitment to meet with the little girl's mum, and when he has done so, he will, as he said he would, meet with other members of the family. I really honestly don't think we should be trying to make party political points out of such a tragic case.
Question number 5, Tom Arthur.
to ask the First Minister how the Scottish Government is marking Challenge Poverty Week.
First Minister.
Well, I think Challenge Poverty Week is very important. It is a reminder that we must continue with the actions we are taking to tackle poverty. Our current actions are supporting low-income households, including targeted support of £1.4 billion last year. In addition, we've delivered over 87,000 affordable homes since 2007. Our increase in early learning and childcare will be transformational in supporting parents. We're also investing in new parental employment support. And of course, through our new Scottish Child Payment, we will lift 30,000 children out of poverty. Of course, it's clear that the biggest danger to increasing poverty is the UK Government's continued welfare cuts and the risk of a no-deal Brexit, which could in itself push 130,000 people in Scotland into poverty.
Tom Arthur.
Can I thank the First Minister for that answer? Parliament will be aware that last week the UN Special Rapporteur said that Scotland is on a very different trajectory than the rest of the UK. He also said that the spirit of the welfare state is alive and humming in Scotland, but is waning elsewhere. The introduction of the new Scottish Child Payment shows how this SNP Scottish Government is determined to do things differently in Scotland. The policy will be transformative. But can the First Minister tell the Chamber what impact the Scottish Government could make if it didn't have to spend millions mitigating the most harmful UK government policies, such as welfare cuts and a no-deal Brexit?
First Minister.
Well, right now, even before we contemplate a no-deal Brexit, we are currently spending £100 million every year to protect people from the UK Government's welfare cuts. The UN Special Rapporteur described that as an outrageous situation, and I thoroughly agree with that. These are funds I think all of us would rather be investing in our own policies to tackle poverty. We are taking bold and radical action. The new Scottish Child Payment was described by poverty campaigners as a game changer, and that's the kind of action we will continue to take to make sure we're doing everything that we can to tackle poverty. But as the seemingly rapid acceleration towards a no-deal Brexit continues, then that makes it all the more obvious that we need to get powers out of the hands of Boris Johnson and his ilk and into the hands of this Parliament, so that we don't have to put up with Tory welfare cuts anymore, because we can take the right decisions here in the first place to help lift people out of poverty and create a better, fairer country for everybody.
Question number 6, Brian Whittle.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what action the Scottish Government is taking to address the reported staffing shortfalls in psychiatric services, particularly those for children.
First Minister.
We're investing £54 million in a package of support to improve access to mental health services for adults and children, providing funding for additional staff and workforce development. In 2018, we saw an improvement in recruitment to psychiatric specialities. There has also been an increase of 15% in the number of CAMS psychiatrists since additional funding came into place in March 2016. We've also provided funding of over £12,000 to the Royal College of Psychiatrists for their Choose Psychiatry campaign to promote psychiatry as a career in Scotland.
Brian Whittle.
I thank the First Minister for that answer, and I was interested to listen to your answers and your response to Alex Cole-Hamilton's questions, because I received correspondence from the Royal College of Psychiatrists stating that more than 1 in 6 consultant children and adolescent psychiatric posts are vacant. To compound this pressure in services, the report in CAMS, 40% of children and adolescent psychiatrists are anticipated to retire within 5 years. But of course, it takes 6 years training for a junior doctor to gain consultant status, and then they report a decrease in the numbers choosing to progress from core to higher psychiatric training. So we have a growing demand, an already high vacancy rate, compounded by a large number of psychiatrists approaching retirement age. So, First Minister, when will the Scottish Government produce a realistic workforce plan that can meet these escalating challenges and ensure that our children receive the mental health care they deserve?
First Minister.
We are already taking action, and as I'm about to set out, that action, while there is still work to do, is already having an effect. There are challenges in a number of medical specialties around recruitment. These are not unique to Scotland. They're experienced in other parts of the UK and indeed other parts of Europe and the world. Those challenges are not made easier if we make it harder for people to come here as a result of Brexit or Tory crackdowns on immigration. And I think that's a point that we should not stop making. But in terms of psychiatry, we have, as I said in my original answer, we've seen an increase in the number of CAMHS psychiatrists since we made additional funding available in 2016. There remain unfilled consultant psychiatrist vacancies in a number of health boards, but over the past 5 years we've increased the number of psychiatric posts by 8.5%. And in 2018, and this is important, we saw a significant improvement in recruitment to psychiatric specialties with a higher fill rate of 72% compared to 55% in the year before that. So these are important steps. There is still work to be done, and we remain focused on ensuring the investment and the plans are in place to do that work and make sure that we have the right medical specialists in place where they're needed.
Thank you very much. And that concludes First Minister's questions. There's no members' business today, so I'm going to suspend this meeting. We resume at 1:30. Parliament is suspended.
Well, it's lovely to be out on such a sunny evening in Edinburgh, but it's a shame that we have to be out tonight protesting against the two-child cap and the rate clause, well more than a year since Alison Thewlis, my colleague at Westminster, first spotted it in the small print of a Tory budget.
Very glad to see such a huge demonstration today and so many people still coming along 1 year after the rate clause came into force to show their opposition to this vile and despicable policy. The UK government have never been able to justify this policy, and we saw that this week with Esther McVeigh's pathetic attempts to say that the rate clause was somehow double support for women and that gives them some kind of chance to talk about the most appalling and disturbing experience of their life.
As you can see behind me, we're at the very beginning of the All Under One Banner rally. You can obviously hear the pipers behind me as events are about to kick off.
It's time to aim high, look resolutely outwards, and never, ever accept second best. Above all, it's time to believe that we can. We can build that better country we know is possible. And friends, we will.
If you enjoy watching our programmes, please help us to be Scotland's independent broadcaster by signing up to become a Broadcasting Scotland supporter.
Wherever you stand, get the fresh view of what's happening in Scotland with iScot. Celebrate everything about our country with intelligent, in-depth insight from lifestyle, culture to puzzles, and all the opinions you'll need. Whether it's digital or by post, subscribe now to iScot.